The rain had only just stopped when Alexander, a 40-year-old man with dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, found himself standing in a long, slow-moving line at the local supermarket. His life at that point had felt heavy, weighed down by the monotony of a marriage that had lost its fire and the unshakable responsibilities of fatherhood. He had been married for nearly 15 years. He had a 10-year-old son, Daniel, whom he loved fiercely. But his wife, Eliza, had grown distant, buried in her own world, her ambitions, and her disillusionments with him. Their relationship had become an arrangement more than a romance. He tapped his fingers absently against the handle of the shopping cart, glancing at the shelves stacked with magazines and candy bars, when he noticed her. A young woman in her mid-20s stood just ahead of him, her auburn hair tied back loosely, a simple blue dress clinging softly to her form. She carried herself with the kind of tired dignity that only someone who worked tirelessly for others could manage. Her daughter, a little girl with golden braids, tugged at her sleeve, asking 100 questions in a rapid, playful stream. Alexander smiled despite himself. The young woman turned slightly and caught his gaze. For a fleeting second, their eyes locked, his dark, burdened eyes meeting her bright, searching ones. He smiled faintly, a half-smile that carried both warmth and fatigue. She smiled back. That was the beginning. Her name was Claire. She was 26, a nurse at the local hospital. Her life was modest, often exhausting, but she carried within her an enduring light. Her daughter, Emily, was her reason for everything, and Claire had grown used to the idea that love, the kind of love she had once dreamed of, might never return to her. She had been left by Emily's father years ago, and the wound had shaped her into someone both stronger and more cautious. That day in the supermarket, what began as small talk about the length of the line blossomed into something that neither of them could have anticipated. They spoke about their children first, about the difficulty of balancing work and parenting, and then about books, music, and the small pleasures they still clung to. Alexander found himself laughing, truly laughing, in a way he hadn't in years. Claire found herself watching him with a strange mixture of curiosity and longing. There was a gentleness in him, hidden behind layers of weariness, that she wanted to know more about. Over the weeks that followed, they found reasons to meet again. Coffee after her shift. A walk in the park with their children. Slowly, cautiously, they wove themselves into each other's lives. Alexander had never intended for it to happen. He had never sought out love beyond his marriage. But the truth was undeniable. He was falling for her. And she, though hesitant and afraid of the chaos it might bring, was falling for him. When Alexander finally told Eliza about Claire, the storm that followed was inevitable. Eliza's fury was cold, cutting, not the fiery anger of someone betrayed, but the measured rage of a woman whose pride had been wounded beyond repair. She accused him of selfishness, of abandoning his family. She told him that his son would never forgive him. The divorce that followed was bitter, filled with silences and sharp words. Alexander moved into a new apartment. Daniel split his time between his parents, and Alexander's world became something fractured yet strangely hopeful. Because in the ruins, Claire was there. Soft, patient, willing to love him despite the scars he carried. For 2 years, their love grew. They celebrated birthdays together, took their children on small trips, and built a life that was imperfect but real. Alexander, with his wealth and connections, provided stability for Claire, though she often insisted she did not need saving. She continued working at the hospital, tending to others with the same compassion she gave to him, and he adored her for it. He had found not just passion, but a kind of peace with her that he had not thought possible. Then, one winter evening, everything changed. Eliza called him. It had been months since they had spoken directly. Most communication had gone through lawyers or brief, tense exchanges about Daniel. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge of something else. "I'm pregnant," she said. Alexander froze. The room seemed to shrink around him. "What?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated. It happened before the divorce was finalized, before everything fell apart completely. Her tone was detached, almost clinical. "I thought you should know." The word struck him like a blow. Pregnant. Another child. His child. And yet Eliza wanted nothing from him. She made that clear. She had no desire to reconcile, no intention of rebuilding what had been broken. "I will raise this child on my own," she said. "Do not think this means you can come back. I don't want you back." When the call ended, Alexander sat in silence for hours. The weight of it pressed against him, heavy and merciless. His life had already been divided between two worlds, his son with Eliza, his love with Claire. But now, another life, another fragile existence, bound him to his past in a way he could not ignore. Claire sensed the change in him before he said a word. She always did. One night, as they sat together on her small balcony, the city lights flickering below, he told her. She listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes clouded with emotions she struggled to contain. Fear, sadness, and something else. An unspoken dread that this revelation might be the undoing of everything they had built. "Do you want to go back to her?" Claire asked softly, her voice breaking despite her effort to sound calm. He shook his head fiercely. "She doesn't want me back. That door is closed. But this child, it's my responsibility. I can't turn away from that." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. "And what about us?" Alexander reached for her hand, gripping it tightly as if he could anchor himself against the tide that threatened to pull him under. "You are everything to me, Claire. I don't want to lose you." But even as he spoke, the conflict tore at him. His sense of duty to Eliza's unborn child warred with his love for Claire. Nights became sleepless. Days became heavy with indecision. He would watch Daniel play with Emily and wonder what it would mean to add another child to this fractured family. He would look at Claire's tired smile, the way she tried to hide her worry, and wonder if he was selfish for keeping her tethered to him while his past continued to haunt their present. For the first time, Claire felt truly afraid. Not of losing him to Eliza, for Eliza had made her stance clear, but of losing him to the weight of his own guilt and responsibility. She had fallen in love with a man who carried many burdens, but this one threatened to crush them both. One evening, after another day of silence between them, Claire finally broke. "Alexander, I can't be the woman who always waits in the shadow of your past," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I love you. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone again. But if your heart is torn in two, if your life will always belong more to what was than to what is, then maybe I don't belong in it." Her words shattered him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as though letting go meant losing the only light he had left. "Don't say that," he begged. "Don't leave me. I need you." But Claire's tears spoke of a pain that would not be soothed by promises. She wanted him whole, and he was not. The months that followed became a test of their love. Alexander divided his time between preparing for the birth of his second child and fighting to keep his relationship with Claire alive. When the baby, a girl, fragile and perfect, was born, he was there at the hospital, his heart breaking with love and sorrow. Eliza held the baby with quiet pride, refusing his offers to reconcile, but allowing him to be part of the child's life. Claire watched from a distance, her own heart breaking. She loved him still, perhaps more than ever, but she feared the inevitable, that his world was too tangled, too divided, for their love to survive. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the tears and the sleepless nights, love has a way of enduring. Alexander refused to let her go. He showed her again and again that she was not second in his heart, that his responsibilities did not diminish the depth of his feelings for her. Slowly, painfully, she began to believe him. Their love became something forged not in ease but in struggle, tempered by fire. Years later, when the wounds had begun to scar over, Alexander would look back at that day in the supermarket, the moment when a tired man met a tired woman and something impossible began. And he would realize that love had saved him. Not the easy kind of love, not the fairy tale he might have once dreamed of, but the kind of love that survives storms, that rebuilds after ruin, that demands everything and gives everything in return. And Claire, holding his hand as their children played together in the fading light of a summer evening, would know the same truth. Their story was never simple. It was messy, painful, filled with choices that tore at their souls, but it was theirs. And in the end, it was enough. The years passed, each one adding new layers of complexity to Alexander and Claire's lives. Their love, once fragile and threatened by uncertainty, had begun to settle into something deeper, steadier, but still haunted by the shadows of what came before. The presence of Alexander's second daughter, Anna, the child born to Eliza, was now a reality woven into the fabric of their days. Claire accepted her, though not without struggle, and Alexander did everything he could to balance the fragile threads of responsibility and affection that bound his life together. Claire's daughter, Emily, grew close to Daniel. Though not related by blood, the two formed a sibling-like bond that softened some of the tensions between their families. Claire often watched them from afar, marveling at how children could find joy and trust, even amidst the complications adults created. Their laughter filled the silences that had once felt unbearable. And yet, despite the progress they made, Claire sometimes felt as though she lived in two worlds. One where she was the woman Alexander loved with all his heart, and another where she stood at the edge of his past, always aware of the ties that bound him to Eliza. There were moments when Eliza's presence stung her pride, not because she still had Alexander's love, but because she had his history, his children, his bloodline. Those bonds could never be erased, and though Claire never voiced it, she often wondered if she would always remain the outsider. One autumn evening, Alexander took Claire to the coast. The air was crisp, the sea restless, waves shattering themselves against the cliffs. They walked along the shoreline, their coats pulled tight against the wind, and Alexander suddenly stopped. He turned to her, his dark eyes serious, the kind of seriousness that came only when he had been thinking far too long. "Claire," he said softly, his voice nearly lost to the wind. "Do you ever regret meeting me?" Her heart ached at the question. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because I've brought you nothing but complications," he whispered. "You deserve a man whose life is simple. A man who can give you all of himself without hesitation. Instead, I've dragged you through divorce, children, battles that weren't yours to fight. Sometimes I wonder if I've been selfish, keeping you when maybe you would have been happier without me." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but not from sorrow. She placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. "Alexander, don't you see? I never wanted simple. I wanted real. And you are real. Every scar, every burden, every moment of doubt. I chose this, knowing exactly what it meant. I love you not despite your past, but because of it. It made you who you are. He kissed her then, the kiss tasting of salt and sea spray, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight in his chest lift. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could be happy. But fate was not done testing them. Months later, Eliza fell ill. It was sudden, a diagnosis that shook even her carefully constructed independence. She had always been proud, strong, unwilling to ask for help, but illness has a way of stripping away pride. Alexander stepped in without hesitation, ensuring she had the best care, that Daniel and Anna were shielded from as much pain as possible. Claire watched him during those days with a complicated mix of admiration and fear. She admired his loyalty, his unshakable sense of duty, but feared that his devotion to Eliza in her time of need would draw him back into the orbit he had once escaped. One night, as he returned late from the hospital, Claire sat waiting for him at the kitchen table. A single lamp lit the room, casting long shadows. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "Alexander," she whispered, "are we strong enough to survive this too?" He sat across from her, taking her hands in his. His own eyes were red from exhaustion. "Claire, you are my anchor. Without you, I would be lost. Yes, I'll stand by Eliza while she fights this, but not because I love her the way I love you. That part of my life is gone. I do it for Daniel, for Anna, for the woman she once was to me. But my heart belongs here, with you." Tears slid down her cheeks and she nodded. "Then I'll stand by you." It was not an easy promise. The months ahead tested them more than ever before. Claire found herself caring for Emily, Daniel, and sometimes even Anna when Alexander was pulled away by Eliza's illness. She did it out of love for him, out of love for the children, though at times her heart ached with exhaustion. There were nights when she fell asleep in a chair, Emily curled against her side, wondering how much more she could endure. But every time Alexander returned, every time he held her and whispered gratitude into her hair, she remembered why she had chosen this life. Because love was not about perfection. Love was about standing in the storm together. When Eliza eventually passed, the grief was profound, especially for Daniel and Anna. Alexander mourned her too, in his own quiet way, mourning not just the woman she had been, but the years of his life entwined with hers. Claire stood by him through it all, her presence steady, unwavering. And when the storm finally began to pass, when the nights grew a little less heavy and the children began to laugh again, Alexander looked at Claire with a certainty he had never known before. She had not just loved him, she had carried him through the darkest chapters of his life. So one spring evening, in the quiet garden of their home, surrounded by the laughter of children who had become a strange, beautiful patchwork family, Alexander knelt before Claire. He did not promise her a simple life. He promised her the truth, the whole of himself, the mess and the beauty alike. And Claire, with tears streaming down her cheeks and a smile that shone brighter than the stars, said yes.